Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Meaningful People podcast. So nice to have you here. We sit down with Rabbi Shimon Russell, who's literally the expert, the number one expert in parenting, Jewish parenting especially. He created like this whole crisis parenting approach. If you're a parent, listen closely. If you're a child, you can also listen. But this is an amazing, amazing episode, and I really, really hope you enjoy it. Wanted to say a big thank you to our friends at Collars & Co. I was in Crown Heights last week. I saw a lot of floppy collars. Crown Heights, I love you, but you guys need to get these shirts from Collars & Co. There's no reason why you gotta be walking around with your collar all shriveled and floppy and going with the wind. You want to make sure to have a strong firm collar like I'm wearing right now in this video. Like, this is one of the most comfortable shirts I've ever worn in my entire life, and you can have it as well. Head to collarsandco.com and use promo code MEANINGFUL for 15% off. The days of your collar looking like it was stomped on and washed 17 times and dried and just like completely obliterated is over. Look at this collar. This is firm. The rest of the shirt feels like a t-shirt. Collarsandco.com, promo code MEANINGFUL for 15% off. And of course, it is after Shavuos, and it's now a little bit of time until our next Yontif. But you want to be prepared financially. You need a financial planner in your circles. That's why you need Moshe Alpert and Associates. Okay, it's so crucial. You want to be able to buy the things for your family. You want to be able to live a financially blissful life. You don't need to change everything. You just need someone in your corner that knows what they're talking about. And that is Moshe Alpert. So send them an email and get a free consultation. That's alpertmoshe@gmail.com. Or you know what? I'm feeling a little bit crazy right now, so I'll just give you his phone number. Give him a call at 718-644-1594. That's 718-644-1594. Your finances are important, and Moshe can help you with that. And of course, a big thank you to Isaac Newman for sponsoring this episode of Zichron Nishmas, his mother, Ruchama, Perel, Malka, Leah, Aryeh, Leib. Any tips, anything that you learn in this episode and the changes you make in your life should be a chus for her neshama. Really hope you enjoy this episode of the Meaningful People podcast with Rabbi Shimon Russell. You are listening to the Meaningful People podcast.
The podcast featuring our nation's most impactful, influential,
and meaningful people. We are so privileged to be joined by Rabbi Shimon Russell here on Meaningful People, 6,000 miles away. But thank you to our friends over there, Yaakov Citron. We are mamish have a good, clear picture of you. So we're very, very excited to be doing this. So thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure, my great pleasure. Took us a while to get this together, but here we are.
Yes,
here we are.
It took us a while, but listen, all good things take time, I guess. My first, I guess, exposure to the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Russell, the teachings of you, was being at Kesher Nafshi events, which is, I guess, more
erroneous.
Or less. No, it's not. It's
not
true.
Goes back earlier, Nachi.
For me,
to Camp Monk.
Camp Monk.
Sure.
Come on, you were in Camp Monk?
Oh, we were both in Camp
Monk.
What?
Rabbi Russell would come to camp.
You remember the butterfly? What do you remember?
Every year for a Shabbos.
That's before my time.
Sure. We had beautiful times every summer for many, many years. Rav Munk Tzitzal invited us, and we came for a week, and I spoke to the boys. It was always a tradition, Shalosh Shudas, tell them a good story. I know if you remember, I meet people all over the world who come over to me, tap me on the shoulder. I remember the butterfly. I remember this. I remember the rock. It's very interesting.
Now you have me curious. I think this is before my time, but what's the butterfly story?
Oh, it's a whole story. We'll do that another time. Ask any of the guys from Camp Monk from the old days. They remember.
Mirza Hashem, I'll get to it. But so yeah, Kesher Nafshi, seeing you speak. I would first like to start, at Kesher Nafshi. I was there. It was a Friday night in Connecticut, and you were joined, which I didn't think you were aware of it, but you were joined by your daughter and son-in-law. I think it was as a surprise on stage, and there's more or less a story to how you got into what you're doing. So if you don't mind, I guess bring us back to Aleph. In regards to you being involved in chinuch, I think it goes back to you with your own kids, with your own family. If you can give us sort of that background,
because it goes really before that. I was in BMG. I was learning in Kollel, planning to be in chinuch. I always wanted to be in Avodas HaKodesh. That was the plan. I mean, we brought up our family in Lakewood, and that was our intention. It really goes back to a very sad story of a younger man who sat 2 seats to my left in Koilel, in the Ezes Noshim, and I saw that he was not well. I didn't know what it meant. I mean, I certainly couldn't have spelt psychology in those days. I had no clue about anything.
Right.
But I saw he was very, very unwell, and I alerted people to the fact that he looked to me like he may even take his life. I mean, he just looks really sick. Anyway, there was no mental health professionals then in Lakewood, nothing. Nobody. Not a psychologist, psychiatrist. There was one lady social worker who was a young woman who was part-time, Chani Cohen, but there was no one, full-time practicing. And unfortunately, this younger man took his life.
Wow.
After that happened, we all began tummeling about mental health. None of us had ever considered it or thought much about it. And one of my chavrusas really encouraged me to consider a different direction with my field. I'd seen this, I'd witnessed it, alerted everyone, and he thought this might be a good career. I thought he was nuts, frankly. Like I said, I wanted to be a Rebbe, a Mashgiach. And in the end, he pushed me to go, as I had learned many years in Eretz Yisrael, he pushed me to go to Rav Shach, because as a Bach, I used to go to Rav Shach all the time to Tzal. So I flew to Eretz Yisrael, and I went to Rav Shach, and I was absolutely shocked when I told him what had happened, and that I really wanted to be in Avodas HaKodesh. I thought he would knock it out of my head and send me back to Koilel.
Right.
But in fact, he got very excited, and he told me his words, which really rung in my head the rest of my life. And it's been my sort of banner, that's helped me in all that I'm doing. The words he said to me is, Heint, das is Avodas HaKodesh. Mental health is Avodas HaKodesh. And he encouraged me very, very strongly. I should go back, and I should go to college. And the rest is history. Yes, I went back, and I went to college, and I got my master's, and I went to Ackerman, which is a family therapy training institute. And then slowly but surely, I began.
I just want to insert very quickly the godless of Rav Shach and the language of Heint, which is Yiddish for today. Today, that is Avodas HaKodesh, and the pichus and the foresight to know what the generation needs. And Avodas HaKodesh yesterday might be different from what Avodas HaKodesh is Heint, what it is today.
Right. Well, it included it. I think it's different as much as he embraced this and saw that we needed, the words he said to me is, we need Mishalanu. We need our own people in this field. And it was time. In fact, he was so excited about it. I had a car coming to take me back to the airport from his house. He walked out into the street with me, holding my arm, being mechazik me, insisting that I do it and giving me all the chizuk he could, which was incredible. It stays with me obviously every step of my life. That experience that put me in the field. So I went into the field, and I was the first full-time mental health professional in Lakewood, and began my journey. Little did I know, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had plans for me and for my family. I didn't understand a lot, very little actually, about what could happen to kids and learning disabilities and all sorts of stuff. I was very primitive. It was in the early years. But my eldest daughter, we had 8 children, the eldest daughter was 14, and she went off the derech rather rapidly. And it was a huge shock to us. As far as we knew, we had a loving home and a loving family. We were doing the right things. And she went off the derech, and it was a huge, huge, huge shake-up and shock. After she went off, we had other children with various disabilities and struggles, and one after the other, we saw the kids were struggling. And that took me into a different world. It opened my eyes to try and understand what was happening. And, a lot happened developmentally in the early years to try and understand and professionalize this whole subject of kids at risk. What was it about? In the early days, it was presumed to be the product of dysfunctional homes. I was in a rather unique position to know that wasn't true. I knew we weren't dysfunctional. I mean, my wife said so anyway, so I had to believe her. But I knew we weren't. I knew we were running, a good home, and things were happening. And in fact, in the early years, I think it was 1999, Jewish Observer had published an article on kids at risk, and a mechanech, they had like a gray box where they isolated a small paragraph in which it said that the overwhelming consensus of Orthodox mental health professionals is that kids who are going off are coming from dysfunctional homes. No, I knew it wasn't true. It wasn't true. And not only wasn't it true, it was damaging and dangerous, because when that rhetoric sits in the street, then all parents with struggling kids will try desperately to micromanage their kids to stop them advertising to the world that we're a dysfunctional home. And we know that that struggle to try and stop them always made it worse and became very, very frightening and destructive and dangerous. So together with a very dear colleague of mine, we wrote to the Jewish Observer and a stark mecha, a letter of mecha, and they published it, and a huge number of people responded in our favor, and then came the famous edition, Kids on the Fringe, that really changed everything.
Right.
I think that was the beginning of the change.
And you put that very succinctly and concisely stated, but I want to highlight the dynamic and paradigm shift in that as long as the problem, as long as the challenge, as long as the issue is attributed to a dysfunctional home, it becomes that much more difficult to acknowledge and openly address the matter, because we're telling everyone that we have a dysfunctional home. And when we could accept that that's erroneous, and there are perfectly functional homes and families that still have this issue active in their set of nisyonis, it's empowering to know that we can deal with this without having to tell everyone that we are dysfunctional. It's just erroneous.
Correct. And dangerous. Not just erroneous, dangerous, downright dangerous. Because as long as we won't identify the true reason, then we will, unfortunately, allow more kids to go off. And we will damage further those kids who are going off and their families. See, I knew that most of us who had struggling kids had to, by default, allow our families into some level of dis-function in order to be able to save our kids. That does not make a home dysfunctional. Actually, I contend it makes a home highly functional, that you deliberately allow a certain level of dysfunction into your home to save your kid, I believe makes your home very functional. Well, you're trying to save your child's life.
Well, if you could, go bring yourself back in time, when your daughter was 14 and she was, showcasing these struggles, and you saw that she was in pain, I imagine that for you and your wife threw you, way off kilter, and for the rest of your kids, it's sort of, it wasn't part of the game plan. You yourself were an avodas kodesh, and especially with what you're saying, it was like a black eye to the public. Now, how did you approach it with your, which it didn't sound like it was just one kid. How did you approach it with your many kids?
Well, it happened one after the other. Slowly, there were certain like learning disabilities they had and problems they had that it made it very difficult for them to function within the strict academic society we lived in, and they simply couldn't do it. And as they had older siblings, the two oldest at that time, who couldn't do the system, just couldn't do it. So of course it began affecting the others who couldn't do it too. And at some point we had to recognize we're going to cut our losses and stop following conventional wisdom and see if we could learn how to embrace and love our kids and help them on their journeys through this world, instead of trying to fit them into a pre-existing mode, a model that we had, a template that we had, because we all were like that. Yeah. We were all in kollel with the anticipation our kids were going to follow in our footsteps. We had no one ever mentioned to us that possibility might not occur.
Well, where did that guidance come from for you as a parent to follow, I guess, or not stick with the conventional mold? What you just said nowadays seems like it's trending to be able to, chanoch l'nara pidarko, and parent each child. But back then, which I presume it's dozens of years ago.
It was a nightmare. I'll tell you nothing. Honestly, it was an utter nightmare. We did in the first few years try to follow conventional wisdom from Mechanchim and Rabbanim, who we went to desperate for Eitzah and advice and guidance. But what I realized over time is they kept giving me tremendous wisdom that was relevant to regular mainstream chinuch. And I consistently saw that wasn't working. I had actually one Yedid Nefesh, one, who would process with me as I began to develop and try to work out another mahalach. It was Rabbi Newberger, Shagi Newberger on Yeshiva Lane in Baltimore, was there for me every night. And we actually met, probably on the phone for years, at like between 12:30 and 1 every night to process and like work through. And I would tell him my ideas and he would be a good charusa for me as we began to process it through. But what eventually emerged was what I, ultimately called crisis chinuch, which was a different modality of chinuch designed to keep your kids close to you, keep them safe, keep them alive, and give them the potential to get through these incredibly difficult teenage years to the point where they become young adults and be able to make healthy choices for themselves. That's really what crisis chinuch was about. It was keeping them alive. We recognized how dangerous. We were watching kids dying, and it was really frightening. Kids were turning to drugs, and we saw it. It just kept on happening. As a matter of fact, in Lakewood, one of the best things we did in the years in Lakewood was the parenting support group that we ran there. And that didn't start until after, unfortunately, a child died. And eventually they allowed us to do it, as it was a mixed group. So that was something, I wanted both mothers and fathers together to hear the same message, to be on the same page.
What was the...
And it took, unfortunately...
Was the crisis chinuch approach which you developed, was that met with sort of backlash in your community, with the people you were dealing with?
Still is to this day.
I can't.
It still is to this
day. If it still is
people.
Today, I can't imagine.
We were refining it. At first, people thought we were mad, and it wasn't public. We kept it private. We shared it only with people who were in the parsha, in the sugya, and I shared it with obviously many clients. There were times, I must tell you, when I was ready to change professions. I was so despondent. I felt so lost. I think I wanted to be a lawyer, an attorney, and just go and sue everyone. That was my fantasy. I was just really mad and hurting. But
who were you mad at?
Myself.
Who were you mad with?
Everything, everyone. I was mad at every moisad and everyone who gave me bad advice,
right,
and everyone who hurt one of my kids. And I was probably mad at Hashem at some point on that journey too, because I knew we were like decent people trying our best, and we couldn't understand this catastrophe that was unfolding under our feet.
That would be a tough lawsuit.
It took
one with Hashem. That would probably. I don't know if you'd win that one.
It took many years of a journey towards understanding more of the nista of Torah, the pnimis of Torah, to understand, Yisod HaGilgul, and this isn't the only life, and there's a picture, and there's a pattern, and there's a purpose. And of course, it brought us to this place now with Kesher Nafshi and things we're doing now that are incredibly touching people around the world. I'm the one who's most shocked at that. When you tell me 100,000 people are going to watch this, it's shocking. That was unimaginable 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
Just unimaginable. But we know today that it is having an impact, and crisis chinuch is having an impact around the world today, and it's really reaching people. But it didn't happen in one go. It was developed by many people, step by step, slowly tested. Nefesh International, we ran 3 conferences working on this, where we brought together 100 professionals, Rabbanim, Mechanchim, and we sat and debated and argued, and tried to work out the sugya and understand what was really going on, what was really happening. It involved research, rethinking, refining. Then I became the director at Our Place. You're familiar with Our Place in Brooklyn.
Of course.
So Our Place started and then faltered, and they asked me if I would come in and see if I could sort of, just assess, just 2 nights, they said. Could you come in for 2 nights and meet with our staff and see if you could work out how to help us? I ended up becoming the director there for about 10 years. I was there 2 nights a week.
Starts with 2 nights.
And it was really, it starts with 2 nights. It was really in Our Place, these think tank groups where we were training mentors, but learning on the job at the same time. We had 450 kids a year coming into our place. And, we had 3 different programs. And it was there with the mentors and the staff that we really hacked it out. We really debated and argued and fought. It got so wild at times. One of the founders, when Moshe Binnick, a tzaddik, Moshe was one of the founders of our place. He got so upset with me at first, he wouldn't sit on the same table as me. He was so mad with this whole new idea that we were bringing in. Eventually, Moshe became like a real chassid of mine and a dear friend, and he saw what we were doing. We were thinking out of the box and really making it focused on the kids, not on a shita. We stopped thinking shitas and we started looking inside the kids to understand what's actually going on and how can we reach them. And that's how crisis chinuch really developed, and I separated it from regular chinuch. I saw it as 2 different subjects and we need to address them differently.
Just in an attempt to sort of chip away at some of that backlash, you mentioned that it's still occurring till today. And I think some of the potential, feedback that Nachi and I can get for having a conversation like this sort of in the public forum is people that might still be of the opinion that this is going to, spread the problem. And as an attempt to chip away at that feedback, I think what we're doing here is we're spreading the solution to the problem. The problem is so prevalent, and the problem doesn't need any of our assistance to spread it. And this is only shedding light, calling awareness to a problem that is so prevalent and is so active in our community that we can only do our part in spreading the solution to it.
Yeah, 100%. There is no community today. There's nowhere in the world, no city, no location, no community with frum Jews where there aren't kids going off. No such thing anymore. And it spreads from the Hasidim to the Litvisha to Lakewood, the Lomdim to the Balabatim. It's everywhere. And to have a simple formula of its dysfunctional families is so, it's just foolish and hurtful.
It's like a cop-out.
Very, very hurtful.
Now, like it was like
I understand that for many families, and I've made this point clear, Nachi, you may have heard me say it at Keshanafshi, it's frequent that parents are so humiliated, embarrassed about what's happening. So they attempt to do the best they can to control their kids and try, I don't mean hide from it, but try and not let it get out of control, using the wrong methods too early. They don't seek help quick enough. Don't make the shift. The fantasy is still there that somehow, maybe Tzvei Petch and they'll get back in the system. Maybe somehow we'll get them back into a good yeshiva. And most parents wait too long. So what happens is by the time the kid breaks, they're actually at war with their parents, in a violent war. Then when and again, I mean this non-cynically, the well-meaning people who try to help them, Rabbanim or Mechanchim, what they observe is a family in crisis. What they observe is a war, and it looks dysfunctional. The kids hate the parents are mad with their kids, but that's because they haven't yet embarked upon the crisis chinuch model. So they look like they're dysfunctional. They were not a dysfunctional family in almost any case. They fell into that dysfunction as they attempted to use the wrong model of chinuch to try and so to speak, save their kids. They fell into the wrong model, and that model caused the estrangement and the hurt and the anger between the family and the child. And that's the model that then gets presented towards those who are trying to help. So it looks terribly dysfunctional. Everyone hates each other. But actually, what came first, the horse or the cart? What actually happened was a problem was bubbling up, which they did not know how to handle. And that's what our hope is through Kesher Nafshi especially. And the Kesher Nafshi is like an unbelievable God-given, organization. It's just amazing what it's doing. Dalia Miller and I receive emails and phone calls every day from people who we've never met, who are simply watching the drashas online and changing their lives and the destiny of their children just by watching the drashas. It's mind-boggling. So what we're trying to do is, prior to getting into that war, let's give this information over so that when you see the problems occurring with your children, you'll know what to do l'chatchila, and you'll avoid all the estrangement, the hurt and the pain, and the safek pekuach nefesh, which we know it is.
Are there some signs, for someone, let's say, who's younger, a younger parent, let's say they're just, their kids are maybe 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old. Are there certain signs that if you see a child exhibiting certain behavior that they can, I guess, switch, flip that switch into normative chinuch to crisis chinuch that can...
There's so many, and I would never, I would always encourage anyone, don't flip a switch. Go consult with someone first and tell them what you're seeing. That means consult with someone who actually knows something about crisis chinuch. Not go to someone who's an expert in chinuch but doesn't know crisis chinuch. That's not going to help you. You need to go to someone who actually knows crisis chinuch and has years of, work and experience working with the struggling youth, and talk to them about what you're seeing and see whether it's time. See if you look for one thing, what we see most of all is the detachment, the disconnect, where the kids are disconnecting, they're disappearing from the Shabbos table, they're isolating, they're not having the normal conversations with you. And I don't mean regular teenagers that go through that where they grunt, especially boys. You ask them, how's your day? Fine. And you're waiting for something else. How's yeshiva? Fine. Anything happened interesting in yeshiva? No. That's
I saw this mother describing how, she asked her young daughter who, how was her day at school today, and did she learn anything or do anything fun? She said it was okay. And then later on the school's WhatsApp group, she sees her daughter holding an alligator that they brought to school. and I was
exactly.
like, what? You didn't think to mention any of this?
No, that's what made it okay. Otherwise, it would have been fine.
Yeah, imagine there was no alligator.
Yeah. So the thing we look for most of all is not that. That's not a disconnect. That's just a teenager. What you're looking for is the sour face and body language of disconnect, where they're disappearing from you. They're isolating their bedrooms. They're privatizing their lives. There's secrecy happening. You see the disconnect. That's probably the biggest red flag of all, is noticing how you sort of had a relationship and rapport with your kid, and now it's disappearing. And again, not the regular teenage angst and struggles that teens go through, where they're finding themselves and they don't want to be under their parents' sort of, hand the whole time. I'm talking about real disconnect, where the facial expression, the body language tells you that they're deeply unhappy and they don't want to talk about it. They're hiding something.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest red flag of all.
I think maybe also something that could be misunderstood, and I still think nowadays there's two camps, probably multiple, but there's two camps of opinion when it comes to this. You had mentioned when you were looking into children who are struggling, you were finding pain. People maybe think that, a child who's maybe going off, they want to have fun, they want to just do their own thing, it's more attractive, they're doing great. But just from myself being at these Kesher Nafshi events and hearing you speak, I feel like you're of the opinion that these children, these kids who are going off and exhibiting this behavior, this is not fun for them. This is a manifestation of deep pain.
Yeah, there's no question. One of the earliest things we recognized, I went out and researched it. We worked out risk factors, what potential risk factors were, and I went to interview kids, hundreds of kids. And I did it both in my office professionally and then in the various schools and moisters that were trying to help struggling kids. I went with their permission and talked to the kids and interviewed them. And what became clear is the trauma. These kids have gone through some form of trauma, and unrecognized. See, trauma is about disconnect. The experience of trauma, when you have it, Kadosh Baruch Hu made it that way, that your body makes you disconnect to keep you safe from the source of the trauma. So if you get bitten by a dog, you get terrified of dogs and you stay away from dogs. And so anything that sounds dog-like, you run away from it. If you can even hear the pitter-patter on the floor of what sounds like a dog, you get frightened and you run away because you got bitten. Well, that's the way the nervous system functions. So it keeps us safe. So what we realized was that from all these interviews I'd done with kids and then talking to them about their experiences, it was clear they were running away. They weren't running to. And this is a fundamental difference that I think is still not fully understood. None of us, any rational, reasonable person in the frum world knows that the internet carries great danger. The exposure of unfiltered internet is exceedingly damaging and dangerous to anyone's life, child or adult. That we all know. Any rational person knows that today. To think that the kids just want the fun of the internet and they're just a regular, normal kid doing just fine in yeshiva and school, but they suddenly dawns on them, oh, I could have more fun with the internet. Let me go and look at that. Or drugs sound so interesting. Let me try that. It's all crazy. It isn't true. It isn't true. That is a real disconnect from the reality of children. That the people who believe that are people who really don't know how to create safety with children, so they'll really tell you what's going on. So what happens is they interview kids, they ask them. For example, sexual abuse is the best example. How many people who I know who tell me they ask kids, were you ever abused? And they say no. So they check it off on their checkoff list. Kid wasn't abused. See, when I ask a kid, were you abused? They say no. And I say, well, would you mind if I describe to you what that means? Would it be okay with you if I give you like a 20, 30 minute description of what that means? What is sexual abuse? Is that okay with you if I do that? And no kid ever said no. No such thing. They all say yes. And I give them the description and I cover all the different aspects of what sexual abuse could look like. And every single time I've ever done it, at the end of it, the kid will look at me and say, well, if that's how you describe, if that's what you define sexual abuse, then yeah, I was abused. In their heads, they frequently do not think about what happened to them as sexual abuse. They just don't think of it. So they say no. You have to know how to create safety with children so that they feel safe enough to share what's really hurting them. When you do, you discover their horrible, hurtful experiences that for them were traumatic. So they run away from, they do not run to. They go to because they're hurting. They self-medicate. So drugs and the internet and movies and TV shows and even the physical boyfriend-girlfriend relationships, these are things they run to because they're hurting and they need to soothe their pain. They need to disconnect from what's hurting them. So they run to it. They're not running. Do you understand? They're running to it to soothe. What's really happening is they're running from the hurt and they go to it simply to cover up or to soothe the pain they're experiencing.
We'll be right back to this episode of the Meaningful People podcast. Do you want to learn halacha seriously? Have you ever thought about maybe getting semicha, but you have limited time? Well, insert Yeshiva Ian Halacha. They offer a structure halacha program on Hilchos Brachos, Shabbos, Isser V'Heter, Choshen Mishpat, and more. With PDF written shirim, accompanied Zoom shirim, you can learn halacha regardless of when you have time or where you are. Each program has a Rav to answer. With review questions, quizzes, and tests, one remembers what you learned. So join the people like yourself. Maybe you're a businessman, a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, cash advance, Hawaii Lakewood. Join these people. A new section of Shabbos and Isser V'Heter are starting this week, so don't delay and join today. Make sure to go to ianhalacha.org. That's ianhalacha.org, IYUN halacha.org, or you can call 973-878-0142, 973-878-0142. You ever dreamed about knowing more halacha? It doesn't matter what your full-time occupation is. This is possible for you through Ian Halacha. Check them out.
I think from my memory, Rabbi Zechariah Wallerstein once described it in one of his speeches that somebody on let's say who's on the derech, on the path, can look on the outside, and maybe they have friends who are who are struggling. And it looks like, if you could use the analogy of a fish, everyone's jumping and there's music and it's a party and it looks like an amazing time. But the way Rabbi Wallerstein described it, he said like, what happens when a fish loses oxygen and loses air? It flops, and it looks like they're having a great time and it looks like they're jumping, but they're just trying to survive and breathe and get rid of the pain.
Correct. Yeah, correct. 100%. They're kids in pain. That's really what they are. And so they go to anything that can help them soothe their pain. Parents complain about they're watching movies nonstop. And I say, my response to that is, well, hold that thought for a moment. Just hold that thought and see if you could ask yourself, why do you think your child needs that? Like before we go in and like the army and just take that tablet away from them, can we ask first why they need it? Because if the child really needs it because they're in so much horrible pain and you take it from them, then you deepen their pain and they're going to want something more.
Well, how do you know?
And that's frequently what.
Well, how do you know
happens.
when a child wants something versus needs something? How do you know? I mean, like that could be a never-ending cycle of again. I'm not a parent of teenagers, so I'm just speaking out of just literally speculation here. But a child can literally just play this game of, I need this, I'm in pain, I need this,
Sure.
I need that.
Sure. So you see, even in crisis chinuch, we only modify the regular rules of chinuch. Means being a parent, go be a parent. Parents should not be permissive. Parents should provide structure for their children. Recently, I actually changed some of the ideas I have about this. I used to talk about rules, structure, and discipline. All kids need it. It sounded like it was wrong. It was like a soundbite. It was like something from God, rules, structure, and discipline. And I changed it to explain what it really means. Kids need structure. They're born self-centered. They need to be self-centered to survive. So they cry and scream and they do what they do to get their needs taken care of as babies. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive. Somehow, we have to help them move from being self-centered to other-centered in order to be married and have a family and have a normal life. So we provide structure for their lives. Slowly but surely, we include structure so they can learn self-discipline. That's the norm. That's what parents are meant to do, and that's what we should be doing. How do we communicate structure to children? The answer is not by philosophy, not by sitting down and explaining to them, because they'll reject it. They'll think we're mad. We do it by providing rules. We give rules that show the parameters of what the structure looks like. So we give rules that define and demark clearly what the structure is that we're expecting. Then we know that they're immature, which means they will test the rules because they can't rely on us that those rules are perfect, because they're not, because we compromise the rules all the time. Like if you say bedtime is 7 o'clock, but you happen to be on an important phone call till 7:10, then 7:10 you look at your watch and you start yelling and screaming. So you go, it's 7:10, everyone to bed. So what do you just tell your kids? 7 o'clock's not bedtime. So even though you said the rule was 7 o'clock, you just proved it's not. So kids pick up that stuff from us all the time. So they test the rules in order to find out whether the rules are true or not. So what do we do then? We offer consequences for breaking the rules. Some call it discipline, consequence, whatever it is. We offer that for the rules in order they should know what the rules are, in order they should keep the structure. That's parenting. We should all be doing that. Here's what we watch for in crisis chinuch. When we do that, so when a kid wants a smartphone or he wants a tablet and we say, no, that's ridiculous. Of course not. That's a dangerous thing. It's not appropriate, blah, blah, blah. Whatever you say, age dependent, community dependent and age dependent, you would stand up to it within the norms of your culture and community. You would not provide it just because they want it. What happens when you start saying no to these things and there becomes this desperate need for it and this dislocation of your relationship, not just defiance, but separation from you. You realize I'm losing my relationship with my child over this fight over the appliance or the privilege or whatever it was. In regular chinuch, you don't lose the relationship. In regular chinuch, you stand up to your child as you should, firmly and lovingly, clearly setting the rules and the structure and the rules. You should be doing that. Stand up to them. And then guess what? They may go to bed in a huff. But when they wake up tomorrow morning, they love you and there's a big smile and everything's fine because they knew you were right. Regular chinuch, that works, and it should. So we stand up to them, but we're always watching. With the kids who are in crisis, that won't work. They go to bed in a half and they wake up in a half. And next day is in a half. And 2 days later and 3 days later, we're losing them. And they don't come home from school and they're disconnecting from us and disappearing from us. Then the red flags are up. Is this the right approach or not? Quickly go and consult with someone who knows about crisis chinuch. That may be the flag you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. How about you?
Yeah, it's almost like if the child is just, aware of the system and attempting to game it, then by the very terms of the system, they don't qualify for crisis chinuch.
Correct.
Right.
And even though they're mad with you tonight, and they will be, and they get very mad with you, guess what? Tomorrow morning, they kind of laugh about it, and they know you were right. It was just testing you.
Yeah, I want to,
which is what kids do.
Yeah.
Right, and by its very definition, where crisis chinuch applies, there is a crisis.
Correct.
If there's an
underlying crisis, you
right.
just didn't see it yet. You didn't see it yet. And the worst crisis of all is disconnect. When your kids disconnect from you or feel rejected or abandoned by their parents, they are in a crisis. Serious crisis.
I want to sort of close the parentheses and sort of delve into, obviously, this book we have in front of us that you recently penned with Zalman Goldstein, Raising a Loving Family. With your family, obviously, it's many years later. You had mentioned you have 8 children and several of them were struggling. When I was at Kesher Nafshi, one of them came on stage, and she's a frum girl, she's married, she has kids. What was, I guess, the journey back or what was that salvation like for you and your family?
Salvation's the wrong word. My wife and I shifted to trying to reach inside what our kids needed, create really loving, healthy attachments with them while they were feeling incredibly rejected and running away from the life that we had brought them up in because of their experiences in that world. We decided we were going to connect with them and make them feel safe with us. That was not an easy job. It wasn't an easy process, but it wasn't about religion. It was about safety. It was about trying to help the kids see that we have unconditional love for you. We have unconditional love for you. We accept you, and we're here with you. Our job is to help you. Your job is not to give us nachas. People ask me about kibbud v'aim. It's very interesting. They frequently get upset with me about this. The chinuch says that the tam for kibbud v'aim is akaras hatov. So people often get upset with me and say, where's the akaras hatov? I'm giving and giving and giving and giving. Everything's for my kids. Where's the akaras hatov to me? They get very, very frustrated about it, which I understand. So my observation to them is, where is the sugya of parenting in the Torah? And it's interesting. If you look through Shulchan Aruch, you won't find one. Isn't that strange? I mean, the most important thing in life is parenting. We have every subject covered in Shulchan Aruch, but there isn't a subject on parenting. Why not? So my answer is this. The sugya of parenting in the Torah is the 5th of the Aseret HaDibros. So people look at me, what are you talking about? That's kibbud v'aim. I say, exactly. That's exactly right. That's the sugya of parenting. What we're meant to do is parent our children in such a way that we bring them up that mimela they'll be makatov to us. They'll have kavod and yira for us. The way we parent them brings them to feel that and see that. Not that we take a hammer, bash them on the head, and criticize them into being makatov to us. That's crazy. On the contrary, what we want to do is the kind of chinuch that will somehow, it'll emerge out of our kids. It'll activate in the children the desire to be mechabed and to have yira and to have derech eretz for us and have a akaras hatov for us. That's the sugya of parenting. That's what we're meant to do. We shifted to that model to our kids, and Baruch Hashem, we're close with all 8 of them. And I say this not, I don't know how to say this. 6 of them struggled with Shemir Shabbos during their teenage years.
Wow.
7 of the 8 are Baruch Hashem Shomer Shabbos and running from homes today.
That's
7 out of 8.
that's an incredible. I don't know the words. It's like a comeback. It's like
I don't know what to say either. But it wasn't what the focus. I must tell you, the focus became clearer and clearer to my wife and I, that the focus wasn't to, so to speak, make them from. That's a choice they have. The focus was to help them be healthy people and do what we could to contribute towards that. And what happened with them emerged from them. It wasn't us. We didn't make them from. That wasn't us at all. They found their way back on their own. Actually, probably the less we talked about it, the more interested they were in finding their way back.
I really wanted to highlight that aspect because kids are really, really smart. And if adopting this approach is utilized as a tactic to try to achieve that outcome, that religious-based outcome, kids see through that so quickly. And this is not about achieving the parents' desired outcome with respect to the children's religiosity, but rather it's, as you're describing, just creating that safety and caring for the child and restoring a relationship as opposed to achieving an outcome.
And then they want to be close to you. You know, I was never dishonest with the kids about it. If they would ask me, you want us to be from, you want me to be from, right? I'd say, well, obviously, duh. You know, like I'm a from person and there would be nothing more happy for me to see you from. But right now, that's not what my concern is. My concern, you should be alive and healthy. You should be a happy person. Find yourself. You want to be from. Listen, my job, I want to tell you, I really believe Al Pi Torah, our job as a parent is to instruct our children, halachas, Torah, what are the mitzvahs, and do our best to help them internalize what those mitzvahs are, to inspire them. We are not the police force. We're not meant to be the mishtara, shoiftim and shoitrim. That's a job for Bezdin. We do not enforce mitzvahs on our kids. We're required by the Torah to teach them the parameters of the mitzvahs, what are the mitzvahs, and to try our best to inspire them to internalize it. That's it. But not to enforce it. That's not our job as a parent. We hope they'll get it. What we found in crisis chinuch, and it just seems to happen, that when you develop a genuine loving attachment with your child, you free them to then grow up and be mature and take a look at their lives and try and make decisions that make sense for them. It isn't a guarantee. It isn't an approach to make them from. It's an approach to make them healthy. And that's a subtlety that people often fail to understand. Well, it sounds like you don't want them to be from. That's a crazy thought. Of course we want them to be from. But if that's your approach to make them from, and it turns out that their experiences in the from world were where the trauma occurred, and that's what they were running away from, well, how counterproductive could you be than to try and make them from again? You're just entering them back into that world. First, heal the trauma, repair the attachments, connect them with you in a loving way where they want to be around you, and that journey is theirs, hopefully, to see if they can find whether that makes sense for them or what level and type and brand of frumkeit makes sense for their lives.
Do you often think of, I guess, you know, it's really some journey to be going from having one after another of your kids, you know, experiencing struggle in life, but of course religious struggle, and then, you know, at night you close your eyes now, and you had mentioned 7 out of 8 of them are now Shomer Shabbos. Does that what type of feelings does that journey elicit in you today?
It makes a deep, frequently have a deep sadness that I didn't know earlier what I knew later. It makes me quite sad that, and I've told my children this, that I wasn't able to understand early enough what was happening to them. And they had to go through so much pain until we got it right. So, you know, I feel I let them down. You know, I didn't see the picture.
That takes tremendous humility.
It took me many years to see it.
That takes a tremendous amount of humility.
If you want me to cry, I will.
I mean, I don't want you to, but I don't not want you to either. I mean,
it was painful. It was a very painful journey, but mostly a painful awareness that we as parents let our kids down. We did not see what was happening. We didn't understand it. We were still doing conventional wisdom far too long before we took the turn. And I'm grateful to my kids that they forgave us and that they want a relationship with us. I'm really grateful to them. It's the other way around. I feel deeply grateful. They're, wonderful young people. And they make me proud. What can I tell you? They all make me, all eight. They make me proud of who they are. And I'm grateful to them that they forgave us for not knowing what we should have known early on.
Wow. It's striking to me to observe you responding to this question and knowing how many relationships between parents and children have a chance today because of the teachings that, as you're describing it, your children taught you, and how that experience, and very painful experience, and I, chas v'shalom, do not mean to discount any of that pain along the journey, but the purpose that I see, that I'm observing emerging from that life experience, are the tools that you've learned in that journey, and how many parents and how many children are benefiting from that today.
I was nervous about the success of the book you just picked up.
yeah.
That my kids may feel, okay, great, so you got all this covered and success over our suffering. I asked this question directly to my eldest daughter. And she let me know, she's now 42, a mother with a family, and she let me know that she's forgiven us. She's put it behind her. And although it was very painful, and that pain may not go away yet, but she's just so proud that we're taking that journey and that pain that we all went through and just simply using it to try and help other people. That meant the world to me, that she felt that way.
That really,
and that's what we tried to do.
It really is special, and it seems like you've devoted your life to this book, Raising a Loving Family, that you recently put out. I saw an article that it swept the gold medal at the 2023 Benjamin Franklin Award event.
I know.
Now that's pretty impressive.
Astonishing. It's crazy. I didn't believe it. It's the Benjamin Franklin Award. It won the gold medal from the Independent Book Publishing Association of America. They're probably the most prestigious book publishing organization, and they award prizes every year in different categories. Shockingly, and I still can't eat it. I still can't quite understand how a frum book. It's clearly, if you read it, you see it's a frum book.
I mean, you have
how it could have won
from a lot of rabbis.
Yeah. No, but it's a totally frum book.
Yeah.
Like people tell me it's a sefer. It's a sefer. It's not a book. It's a sefer. Zalman took all my drushes and teachings, and he spent a year putting it together, and then he and I edited it a number of times to get it just right. We worked together. We had a beautiful relationship developing the book, and it won the gold medal. I even had 2 non-Jews wrote me emails thanking me for putting the glossary in the back of all the Hebrew and Aramaic terms so they could read the book.
That's amazing.
Wow.
And they told me that all non-Jews should be reading this book.
That's amazing.
Crazy thing. I couldn't believe it. And it won the gold medal. I mean, that's mind-boggling in the field of psychology, in the contemporary world, where I clearly talk in the introduction about my concern about how the nuclear family is being, damaged and fought against in the secular world. There's a real attempt to rip it down and reshape it from the family we know it to be traditionally. And to have a book that clearly states that's its purpose, win the gold medal. I don't know. I see Hashem's hand in this. I'm waiting every day. I'm waiting every day to get a letter saying, "Oops, we made a mistake. Sorry."
Is part of your mission with
we
this?
meant raising love in family. Sorry, it was a typo.
Listen, we wrote the book. The cover was a book we hoped that every woman would pick up. I'm not sure the men would, but the cover was designed because ladies pick up books like this.
Yeah.
But every page of the book, we were makbid. Every page has a chiddush. It's packed. This book could have been 10 volumes. We wrote it in a way where every single page has an original thought, a chiddush, something that men could nosh on and enjoy and appreciate. And
for the record, I also love the cover. Just for the record.
For the record, you like the cover too. Okay.
I want to ask you, as is part of your mission
Yes.
with this book. I know it says on the front, includes a section for children in crisis. I feel like part of your
Yes.
mission is to sort of bridge that gap between normative chinuch and crisis chinuch. Whereas, maybe you don't have children in crisis, but you still want to raise resilient children. Worst comes to worst, they're
absolutely.
equipped with the skill set to, like a life vest.
The entire premise of the book was prevention. The entire premise is this. Parents almost never know until way after that their child has experienced trauma. Without almost exception, it's very rare that the parents know about it till later on. There are some who do, and they're the ones who don't need the book because they understood intuitively or from their parents. They were blessed with the wisdom and knowledge how to bring up children to feel attached, connected to them, and therefore resilient, because attachment, real connection to the parents, is the key to resilience. When a child feels safe and secure, seen and soothed, when they feel that connection to their parents and proper healthy attachment, then when things are happening or some problem occurs to them, like abuse, they go to their parents for help. They feel the safety. They go right away. They don't feel the shame. So the premise on the book was, can we give that information to everybody so we can all create resilient children? We can all bring up our children with resiliency so that if and when they face things which happen and you have no control over, they happen outside the house. They don't happen necessarily in the house. They happen to your kids at school because they have learning disabilities,
Right.
which is like a main problem, the learning trauma that I talked about, a lot. And then the sexual trauma, of course, can happen frequently outside the house. Certainly to the boys, it almost always happens outside the house the first time. So can we give them the tools and knowledge with which to lechatchila develop resiliency in their children, create a resilient family, so that should problems happen, the likelihood is the dip for your children after they've experienced some sort of traumatic event, the dip will be very shallow. Mm-hmm. They'll come to you, they'll seek help, and they will grow from the experience. They will not go off. That's really the premise.
Can I ask you?
Create resiliency.
Can I ask you to elaborate on that rubric? I think you said safe, secure, seen, and soothed.
Sure. So I mentioned this at the very first Kesher Nafshi conference, that I'd seen this in Dan Siegel's book, Parenting from the Inside Out. And I don't know, when I read it, it grabbed me as such a profound principle of creating healthy attachment. And I've been working with it for many, many years as a central theme in all the work. And what's amazing about it, so fantastic, is not only is it profound in terms of developing resiliency in our children, and therefore prevention, protecting them, so by making them feel safe with us at home. You have to read the book to get all the ideas. I'm not going to give a drasha now on safe, secure, seen, and soothed. But the 4 S's of attachment, everyone knows in Kesher Nafshi, I talk about this every single drasha. I don't think there's a drasha where I don't mention it because it's so crucial. But guess what? Not only is it crucial in prevention, turns out that it's a profound and incredibly elegant and simple model for recovery. So that I work with families whose children are struggling, and we take a look at the 4 S's, safe, secure, seen, and soothed, and ask ourselves to be curious about which one is missing, or which ones are missing. And can we strengthen those with your children? What can we do to help your kids feel safer with you, feel more secure with you, feel seen by you, and feel soothed by you? What can we do to do that? And as we use it in a recovery model, parents are discovering all over that it's actually reaching their kids both prevention and recovery. Wow. It's a vehicle in both directions. That's how profound it is. It's absolutely mind-boggling, and it forms the center of the whole thesis of crisis chinuch is built around it.
It's interesting because when I was by the last couple of Kesher Nafshi events, I would look at my wife, and more recently, the first one we went with our daughter, who at the time was just 1.5, 2 years old, and me and my wife are looking at each other like, "What are we doing here?" Like these people are walking around and it's just really incredible. Every single person that goes to one of those Shabbosim leaves their ego and everything at the door. You know, they are going to be best for their children and to learn and to gain skills. And then, you know, what we saw over Shabbos is that, like, this is not just for parents who have a child who's in crisis or struggling. Every single person who's a parent needs to know these things. These aren't like the ideals and the teachings that you give are not just, if you have a child who's showcasing certain, struggles, you need to know this. Like, these are like, is it possible to normalize the prevention for parents getting into, like,
that's the book. Pick it up, hold it. That's the book. That is the book.
and then read it.
I'm serious, Nachi. That's what we wrote the book for. The idea was people kept saying to me exactly what you're saying to me. I would talk about this always, crisis chinuch, crisis chinuch, crisis chinuch. And young people would come over to me and say, Rabbi Russell, I understand you keep saying crisis. Why can't we use some of these principles in regular chinuch? To which I would say things like, listen, if it works for you, why don't you give it a shot? I knew if I talked about any of this originally as sort of mainstream chinuch, people think I'm mad. Totally mad. They would reject it. What's happened is that it's really given solid information to parents in this day and age, and it's a desperate need in this day and age to create the deep attachment we need with our kids. I don't envy young parents like yourselves bringing up little kids. I watch my children bringing up our grandchildren, and it's a completely different world than whatever challenges and struggles we had.
A lot of cocoa melon.
It's incomparable.
A lot of cocoa melon.
We have schusavas.
Yes, it's incomparable to the challenges that parents will face today. And the answer to it all is attachment. If you have deep, meaningful attachment, you create an environment with your children where they feel safe with you. They feel secure in your company. They feel secure in the home and the life that you provide for them. Probably most importantly, they feel seen. They notice that you notice them. You notice their strengths. You notice their weaknesses. Neither scare you. You're just there to help them. But you see them and you see their life and you soothe them. Not like us, you had a problem as a child. You got whacked. The Rebbe whacked you. You got whacked because you got whacked. In this world, first soothe your kid. Soothe them. You want to talk about how they got into the problem in the first place? Tomorrow. Wait 24 hours. Do it tomorrow. No problem. Just don't do it today. We wanted to bring that information. People were literally pressuring me. It was a crazy thing. And thanks to Zalman, he came to me and offered to write the book. He himself found he benefited so much himself. He writes in his introduction, he writes how it changed his life, the ideas. And then he came to meet me. And we had a beautiful collaboration working on this together.
Russell, as we wind down, I want to ask you if you can close your eyes and talk to yourself 28 years ago. If you could talk to a younger Rabbi Shimon Russell, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself then? And I think that whatever you say will be very applicable to those maybe in that parsha today.
So I think the primary thing is look at your children for what they need. Like, get rid of models in your brain of who you wish they were. When we were young, by the bris, the Shalom Zacher, we all thought we had, the Briskarovs and the Shammad come back to me, or the Baal Shem Tov of Chassidish, and everyone by the Kiddush, you thought you had Sarah Schneer's Neshama came back to you. We had dimyonis and fantasies of who we wanted our kids to be. And sadly, we organized our chinuch around our kids under the false banner of who we wished they were, who we wanted them to be, who we projected they should be. And actually that's not Torah, and it's not common sense, and it's certainly destructive psychologically. The shift I would have made is to looking at all my kids. When it says in Mishlei, well, Shlomo Melech meant it. And unfortunately, we abandoned that Vav. As one person once said to me tragically, just lost himself. He regretted it afterwards, terribly regretted it. But he lost himself in his parenting when he said to me that the Vav of Darkei, he said that goes on the father. The Vav geht auf den Tata. He goes on the father. Like he's such a distortion of truth. And then he realized he was lost. And he was lost, as many of us were lost, because we had a template in our brain of who we thought we'd given birth to and who we were determined to make them be. And that was a mistake. What we should have done is taken a look at the unique souls of all our children and tried to watch them emerge and see who they are, and then do our best to help them maximize the wonderful great potential of who they could be and who they should be. In fact, that's what chinuch, the Chovos Al Talmidim, says it very clearly. That's really what chinuch is, to externalize, to pull out the potential in a child and reflect it back to them, to show them what their greatness is and who they should be and how they should use their koichos. We didn't do that. We had this template in our brains, that just told us this is who I want my kid to be. So I'm sending him to a school that fits my values and my belief system. And sometimes that works. And sometimes it doesn't, because it's not attuned to who your child's neshama actually is. I think that's the greatest shift I would have made, is to take a closer look at my children and try and get my own templates out of my brain.
Rabbi Russell, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on this program. I think that many people will pick up this book. Just literally from listening to this episode, I'm not a big reader, but I'm going to read. I'm going to read this
book. Read it. You won't be able to put it down. You'll see. Raising a Loving Family.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hatzlacha in your work.
Amen.
Yeah, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Amen.
Really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Meaningful People podcast. A lot of tips and advice were put down by Rabbi Russell here. You could pick up his book. You could read his book. The link to purchase his book is in the description of this episode, Raising a Loving Family. It became such a popular book. Like we said in the episode, it swept the gold at the Benjamin Franklin Awards, which is crazy. So an amazing book. Get your hands on it. And you know what? We're going to go ahead and raffle off a signed book from Rabbi Russell. Go ahead and drop a comment in the YouTube channel right now. Go to YouTube, drop a comment, say, hey, love this episode. Hey, this is awesome. Make sure to subscribe and like the video to join the raffle for a signed book from Rabbi Russell on Raising a Loving Family. An amazing book. Hope you really enjoyed this episode. We have more coming your way, more really exciting episodes coming your way. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, subscribe on Apple and Spotify and YouTube. And we hope to be seeing you again real soon here at Meaningful People Podcast. Have a great week, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this video from Meaningful Minute. We have so much more content for you. You may like this. You may like this. Take your pick. Let us know what you think.